New York had learned long ago that the De Luca name was never spoken loudly. It was whispered in penthouses behind locked doors, inside police stations after midnight, and across expensive restaurants where powerful men suddenly lowered their voices. Entire criminal empires had disappeared after challenging the De Luca family. Politicians accepted their favors. Judges feared their influence. Even rival mafia organizations avoided crossing their path unless they were prepared to start a war they couldn't survive. So when rumors spread that Alessandro De Luca, the ruthless head of the De Luca syndicate, was searching for a bride, society expected the lucky woman to be the daughter of a billionaire or the heiress to another powerful mafia dynasty. Instead, he chose a plus-size baker who barely earned enough money to keep the lights on. It wasn't love. It wasn't fate. It was revenge. Alessandro intended to make her the living punishment for a man who had destroyed his family 25 years earlier. Every smile she lost would be another wound inflicted on her father. Every tear she shed would remind him what it felt like to lose everything. But revenge had one dangerous flaw. It never asked permission before changing the heart of the man seeking it. Snow drifted gently across Mulberry Street, covering the sidewalks in a blanket of white while the golden glow of Christmas decorations reflected against the bakery windows. Inside Sweet Haven Bakery, warmth replaced the bitter winter outside. The comforting scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and freshly baked bread wrapped around the small shop like a familiar embrace. Emma Carter slid another tray of sourdough loaves onto the cooling rack before rubbing the ache from her wrists. She had been awake since 4 that morning, kneading dough, decorating cakes, and serving customers almost without pause. Running a bakery alone wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. At 28, Emma had accepted that life wasn't going to hand her easy victories. Her bakery struggled every month. Bills always arrived before enough customers did. The old industrial oven complained louder than she ever dared to. Still, she refused to quit. Baking had been the last dream she shared with her late mother, and every loaf that came out of the oven felt like keeping that promise alive. Emma wasn't the kind of woman magazines placed on their covers. She had soft curves that filled out her flour-covered apron, full cheeks that turned rosy from standing near hot ovens, and kind hazel eyes that always seemed to search for the good in people before judging them. People often underestimated her. Some ignored her. Others mocked her size without realizing she could hear every careless joke. She never answered with anger. She simply baked another loaf of bread. Kindness had become her quiet rebellion. The tiny bell above the entrance chimed. Emma smiled automatically without looking up. "Good evening. I'm almost closing, but I still have fresh cinnamon rolls if—" The words stopped. 4 men dressed in identical black overcoats entered first. They didn't browse. They didn't speak. Their sharp eyes examined every corner of the bakery with military precision. The only customer still drinking coffee quickly grabbed his coat and hurried toward the exit without finishing his cup. One bodyguard locked the front door. Another quietly pulled the blinds shut. The cheerful bakery suddenly felt suffocating. Emma's heartbeat quickened. The 5th man entered. Everything changed. Alessandro De Luca carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had never been told no. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat over a perfectly tailored Italian suit, he looked less like a businessman and more like a king who had accidentally wandered into the wrong kingdom. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw. His expensive watch caught the warm bakery lights. His gray eyes remained cold enough to freeze the room despite the warmth surrounding them. He looked around only once. Fresh bread. Holiday decorations. Simple wooden tables. Then his gaze settled on Emma. She suddenly became painfully aware of everything about herself. The flour dust on her sweater. Her hair escaping from its loose bun. The apron tied around her curvy waist. She instinctively wiped her hands against the fabric. "Can I help you?" Silence. The kind of silence that made every second feel heavier than the last. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. "Emma Carter." She nodded cautiously. "Yes. You'll come with us." Emma blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're not asking." She looked toward Alessandro. Surely this had to be some kind of mistake. "I think you've confused me with someone else." For the first time, Alessandro spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, dangerously quiet. "We never confuse identities." Emma forced a nervous laugh. "I own a bakery." "I know." "I don't know anyone in organized crime." "I know." "I've never even had a parking ticket." "I know." Every answer somehow made the situation worse. Alessandro removed one leather glove with deliberate calm before placing a thick cream-colored folder on the glass display case. Emma looked down. Her breath caught. Inside was a marriage certificate. His signature already occupied one line. The second remained empty. Her name was printed beneath it. She looked back up, convinced she had misunderstood. What is this? Our wedding. Emma stared at him. No. Tomorrow morning. No. His expression never changed. You misunderstand. I understand perfectly. Her voice shook. I'm not marrying a stranger. You aren't being given a choice. She took a step backward until her legs touched the cooling rack. You can't force someone into marriage. Alessandro slowly walked closer. The scent of expensive cedarwood cologne mixed strangely with the sweet aroma of fresh pastries. He stopped only a few feet away. My family doesn't negotiate. Emma lifted her chin despite the fear rising inside her chest. My answer is still no. For the first time. Something resembling amusement flickered across his face. Not warmth. Not kindness. Calculation. He reached inside his coat and placed something small onto the counter. A silver locket. Slightly scratched. Beautiful. Emma froze. Her breathing stopped. She recognized the tiny rose engraved on the front immediately. It belonged to her mother. The very same locket that had vanished from the hospital on the night she died 22 years ago. Emma's fingers trembled as she reached toward it. Her voice was barely audible. Where did you get this? Alessandro watched her carefully. The answer belongs to my wife. Tears blurred Emma's vision. My mother wore this until the day she died. I know. Then tell me. I will. He slipped one glove back onto his hand. After the wedding. He turned toward the door. His bodyguards unlocked it instantly. Cold winter air swept through the bakery. Before leaving, Alessandro looked over his shoulder one final time. If you don't arrive tomorrow? His voice remained calm enough to be terrifying. I'll bring the wedding to you. The door closed behind him. The bakery fell silent once again. Emma stood motionless, staring at the silver locket resting in her trembling hands. For 22 years, no one had known what happened to it. No one. Which meant the ruthless mafia boss walking into the snow knew something about her mother's death. A secret that could change Emma's life forever. Emma Carter barely slept. The silver locket rested on her bedside table, catching the pale glow of the moon every time she turned over. She had opened it at least 20 times during the night, hoping to find something she had missed as a child. A hidden photograph, a folded note, anything that could explain why the most feared mafia boss in New York possessed the one object that had disappeared after her mother's death. There was nothing. Only two faded initials engraved inside. Her mother, Evelyn Marie Carter. Emma closed the locket and pressed it against her chest. If you know the truth, she whispered into the empty apartment, why won't you tell me? Outside, dawn slowly painted the city in shades of silver and blue. For everyone else, it was the beginning of another ordinary morning. For Emma, it felt like the last morning of her old life. Across Manhattan, the top floor of the De Luca Tower was already alive with activity. Tailors rushed through hallways carrying garment bags. Security teams checked every entrance twice. Luxury cars lined the private underground garage. No one questioned Alessandro's orders. No one dared. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, Alessandro watched the city awaken beneath him. His reflection stared back from the glass. Cold. Unmoved. His trusted advisor, Matteo Ricci, quietly entered the room. You still have time to cancel. Alessandro didn't turn around. I never cancel. This marriage won't bring your parents back. It isn't supposed to. Matteo sighed. I've known you since we were boys. Revenge has already taken half your life. The other half belongs to the Carters. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Matteo asked the question everyone else feared. Are you certain she's involved? Alessandro's jaw tightened. No. Then why punish her? His answer came without hesitation. Because her father disappeared before justice found him. And if she's innocent? Alessandro looked out over the skyline. Innocence doesn't erase blood. Yet even as he spoke those words, Emma's frightened eyes flashed through his mind. She hadn't argued with arrogance. She hadn't demanded money. She hadn't begged. She had asked only one question. Why me? 4 reasons he refused to examine. That question still echoed inside him. At precisely 9 o'clock, 3 black luxury SUVs stopped outside Sweet Haven Bakery. Emma was waiting. Not because she had accepted the marriage. Because she needed answers. She locked the bakery door one final time before slipping the keys into her coat pocket. If I come with you, she said as the bodyguards approached. "You'll tell me about my mother." The oldest guard lowered his gaze. "Mr. De Luca keeps his promises." Emma wasn't sure whether that comforted her or frightened her more. She climbed into the waiting vehicle. As the convoy disappeared into morning traffic, she watched her bakery grow smaller through the rear window. She couldn't shake the feeling that she might never return. The ceremony took place inside an old cathedral hidden behind iron gates on a private De Luca estate. There were no flowers, no music, no smiling guests. Only armed guards dressed more elegantly than most wedding parties. Everything about the place felt less like a celebration, and more like the signing of a dangerous business contract. Emma stepped out of the car wearing a simple ivory dress chosen for her only hours earlier. It fit surprisingly well, though she suspected several tailors had worked through the night to alter it. The soft fabric hugged her curves gracefully without trying to hide them. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel embarrassed by her reflection. She simply wished the reason for wearing the dress were different. Inside the cathedral, Alessandro stood before the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked exactly as he had the night before. Calm, untouchable. As though marrying a complete stranger was just another item on his schedule. When Emma reached the front of the aisle, their eyes met. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. The priest began speaking. Emma heard almost none of it. Her thoughts remained fixed on one question. What did this man know about her mother? When the vows arrived, Alessandro answered first. "I do." His voice never wavered. Emma hesitated. The cathedral became unbearably quiet. Every guard seemed to stop breathing. She could run. She could refuse. She could fight. But then, she remembered the silver locket. The only link to her mother's final days. Slowly, she looked into Alessandro's cold gray eyes. "I do." The words felt heavier than chains. Moments later, the marriage was complete. Outside, photographers were nowhere to be seen. The De Luca family didn't allow witnesses. As Emma walked toward the waiting limousine, she finally broke the silence. "You promised answers." "I did." "Then tell me." Alessandro opened the limousine door for her. "Your mother wasn't who you believed she was." Emma's heart skipped. "What does that mean?" "She saved someone's life." "Whose?" He looked directly at her. "Mine." Emma froze. The world around her seemed to disappear. "You were only 6 years old," she whispered. "Exactly. My mother never knew you." "She did." "No." Emma shook her head desperately. "You're lying." "I never lie." Before she could ask another question, Alessandro climbed into the limousine. The convoy began moving. Emma sat in stunned silence as the city disappeared behind tinted windows. Nothing made sense anymore. If her mother had saved his life, why was he using her daughter for revenge? An hour later, the convoy reached De Luca Manor. The mansion rose above the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River like an ancient fortress. Stone walls, iron gates, private gardens stretching for acres. Security cameras hidden among sculptures. Luxury mixed seamlessly with intimidation. As Emma stepped inside, dozens of household staff lined the grand entrance hall. Every servant bowed respectfully. "Welcome home, Mrs. De Luca." The words felt foreign. Home. This place wasn't home. It was a prison wrapped in marble. A middle-aged housekeeper named Sophia approached with a gentle smile. "If you need anything, Mrs. De Luca, please ask." Before Emma could answer, another voice echoed through the hall. "You won't be staying long enough to unpack." Emma turned. A beautiful woman in an emerald designer dress stood at the top of the staircase. Tall, elegant, confident. Her eyes rested on Emma with open contempt. "I'm Isabella Moretti," she said smoothly. "I was supposed to become Mrs. De Luca." Silence settled across the hall. Isabella smiled without warmth. But apparently, her gaze swept dismissively over Emma. Alessandro developed a taste for charity. Emma's cheeks burned, but she refused to lower her head. She had endured cruel comments her entire life. This one would not break her. Before she could respond, Alessandro entered behind them. His expression darkened instantly. "Isabella." She smiled sweetly. "I was only welcoming your wife." Alessandro's voice turned dangerously quiet. "You've said enough." For the first time that day, Emma noticed something unexpected. He wasn't angry because Isabella had insulted him. He was angry because she had insulted Emma. And that tiny, almost invisible moment of protection confused her far more than the forced marriage ever had. As Isabella walked away, her smile disappeared completely. She glanced back once. The hatred in her eyes wasn't directed at Alessandro. It was aimed entirely at Emma. Emma suddenly realized something terrifying. Marrying the most dangerous man in New York hadn't just made her a wife. It had made her someone's target. The first week inside De Luca Manor passed like a silent storm. Every hallway echoed with discipline. Every servant moved with military precision. Breakfast appeared at exactly 7. Meetings began at 8. Security patrols changed every 2 hours. Nothing happened without Alessandro's knowledge. Yet despite living under the same roof, Emma barely saw her husband. He left before sunrise. He returned long after midnight. Sometimes she heard the distant rumble of his car entering the estate while she stood by her bedroom window, unable to sleep. She would watch his tall figure disappear through the front doors surrounded by armed guards, his expression as unreadable as ever. It reminded her that she wasn't living with a husband. She was living beside a king who ruled through fear. Emma refused to become another decoration inside the mansion. Instead of spending her days in luxurious bedrooms or elegant gardens, she wandered into the enormous kitchen where chefs prepared meals worthy of five-star restaurants. The staff immediately stopped working. No member of the De Luca family had ever entered the kitchen simply to cook. Emma smiled politely. "I hope you don't mind if I borrow a little flour." Within an hour, the rich aroma of fresh bread drifted through the mansion. Warm butter, vanilla, honey. For the first time in years, laughter quietly replaced the usual silence among the kitchen staff. Even Sophia, the elderly housekeeper, wiped tears from her eyes after tasting one of Emma's cinnamon rolls. "I haven't eaten bread like this since my grandmother was alive," she whispered. Emma smiled. "Then take another." By evening, every servant had gathered in the kitchen for a few precious minutes, sharing pastries and stories instead of rushing through another exhausting workday. None of them noticed Alessandro standing silently outside the doorway. He watched from the shadows. No one bowed. No one looked frightened. His employees were smiling. It was something he hadn't seen inside De Luca Manor for years. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away. But the smell of cinnamon followed him all the way to his office. The following afternoon, Emma found herself standing in the estate's greenhouse. Hundreds of white roses surrounded her. She gently brushed her fingers across one blooming flower before hearing footsteps behind her. "You've changed the atmosphere of this house." She turned. Alessandro stood several feet away, his hands tucked inside the pockets of a dark wool coat. "I only baked bread." "You reminded people they're human." Emma looked at him carefully. "And when was the last time someone reminded you?" "For the first time since they met." Alessandro didn't answer. His silence revealed more than words ever could. That evening, Emma finally gathered the courage to ask the question haunting her since the wedding. "You promised to tell me about my mother." Alessandro closed the folder he had been reading. "When I was 6, my family's car exploded." Emma's eyes widened. "My mother saved you?" He nodded once. "She pulled me from the wreckage before the fire spread." Emma felt her throat tighten. "Then why are we enemies?" His gray eyes darkened. "Because 3 months later, someone betrayed my father." He walked toward the fireplace. "The man responsible disappeared before we could find him." Emma already knew the answer. "My father." Alessandro said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence confirmed everything. Emma lowered her eyes. "I never knew him." "I believe you." She looked up in surprise. "You do?" "I've investigated your life." His voice remained calm. "You've worked every day since you were 17. No criminal record. No contact with him." Emma's heart skipped. "Then why marry me?" Alessandro looked directly into her eyes. "Because revenge made more sense than forgiveness." Before Emma could respond, alarms suddenly echoed throughout the mansion. Red emergency lights flashed across the ceilings. One of the guards burst into the study. "Boss." His breathing was ragged. "We've captured a spy inside the estate." Alessandro's expression hardened instantly. "Who sent him?" The guard hesitated. He was carrying a photograph." "What photograph?" The guard handed over a folded picture. Emma's blood ran cold. It was a recent photograph? Of her. Not Alessandro. Not the mansion. Only Emma. Someone outside the De Luca family wasn't hunting the mafia boss anymore. They were hunting his new wife. The entire mansion erupted into controlled chaos. Within seconds, armed guards flooded every corridor while security teams sealed the estate. The elegant calm of De Luca Manor vanished beneath the sharp clicks of rifles and hurried footsteps. Emma stood frozen. The photograph recovered from the captured spy still rested on Alessandro's desk. It was unmistakably recent. Someone had followed her outside the bakery. Someone had watched her after the wedding. And someone wanted her badly enough to send a spy into the most heavily guarded estate in New York. Alessandro picked up the photograph, studying it in silence before handing it to Matteo. Question him. Matteo nodded once. If he refuses? Alessandro's expression turned cold. He won't. The heavy door closed behind them, leaving Emma alone with her husband. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally Emma broke the silence. This has nothing to do with me, does it? Alessandro looked at her. It has everything to do with you. She shook her head. I don't understand. You were never supposed to become a target. His words surprised even himself. When he married her, she had been nothing more than a weapon against another man. Now, someone else was treating her like a weapon too. And he hated it. An hour later Matteo returned. The spy is dead. Emma's eyes widened. Dead? He swallowed poison before he said a word. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Professional. Matteo placed a silver ring on the desk. We found this. Alessandro's expression darkened the instant he recognized the symbol engraved on it. A black serpent wrapped around a dagger. The Romano Syndicate, he muttered. Emma frowned. Who are they? The family that murdered my parents. The room fell silent. Matteo looked between them. They've resurfaced. Alessandro slowly closed his fist around the ring. They're not after me. He looked at Emma. They're after my wife. That evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the Hudson. Rain crashed against the mansion windows while lightning illuminated the dark cliffs surrounding the estate. Emma stood alone in the greenhouse, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. Everything had changed in only a few days. She had lost her bakery, her freedom, her ordinary life. Yet the man she had been forced to marry was no longer the monster she expected. He was still ruthless, still feared. But beneath the armor, she had begun seeing something else. Loneliness. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. You shouldn't be here alone. Emma turned. Alessandro stood beneath the doorway, rain dripping from his black coat. She smiled faintly. I needed to think. He stepped inside. So did I. For several seconds they simply listened to the rain. Then Emma spoke softly. You don't look at me the way you did on the first day. His gray eyes met hers. No. You've changed. I have. Emma searched his face. Why? Alessandro exhaled slowly. When I married you, he admitted, I wanted your father to suffer. And now? His answer came almost as a whisper. Now I'm trying to make sure you never do. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken. Before either of them could say another word, a deafening explosion shook the entire greenhouse. Glass shattered in every direction. The force of the blast threw Emma backward. Without thinking, Alessandro lunged toward her, wrapping his body around hers as thousands of razor-sharp glass fragments rained down. The greenhouse collapsed into darkness. Outside, gunfire erupted across the estate. The Romano Syndicate had finally made its move. As alarms echoed through the night, Alessandro held Emma tightly against his chest, shielding her from the falling debris. For the first time since marrying her, revenge no longer mattered. Only one thought filled his mind. No one was going to take his wife away from him. Rain poured relentlessly over De Luca Manor as gunfire echoed across the estate. Flashes of muzzle fire pierced the darkness while Alessandro's guards returned fire from behind marble pillars and stone walls. The Romano Syndicate had planned the attack carefully. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to finish a war that had begun decades earlier. Inside the shattered greenhouse, Alessandro helped Emma to her feet. Are you hurt? She quickly shook her head. I'm fine. Only then did she notice the deep cut across his shoulder where a shard of glass had sliced through his coat. You're bleeding. It's nothing. It isn't nothing. Before he could object, Emma tore a strip from the bottom of her dress and wrapped it tightly around the wound. Even with bullets flying outside, her hands remained remarkably steady. Alessandro watched her quietly. No one had cared whether he was injured in years. Yet the woman he had married for revenge instinctively chose to protect him. At that moment something inside him changed forever. Another explosion shook the mansion. Matteo rushed into the greenhouse. Boss. They've breached the east gate. How many? At least 30. Alessandro nodded once. Get Emma to the panic room. Emma immediately stepped forward. No. Both men looked at her. I'm not hiding. "This isn't a request," Alessandro said firmly. "It is if you're my husband." For the first time since their marriage, she reached for his hand. "If we're running from this together, then we're facing it together." Her quiet courage stole every argument from his lips. Minutes later, the fighting reached the grand entrance hall. Broken glass covered the marble floors. Smoke drifted through the air. The leader of the Romano syndicate finally stepped inside. Victor Romano. Older. Cold-eyed. Carrying decades of hatred behind a confident smile. "So." He laughed softly. "The great Alessandro De Luca married the baker." Alessandro stepped in front of Emma. "This ends tonight." Victor smiled. "It already did." He tossed a worn leather folder onto the floor. "It contains the truth your father never wanted you to know." Emma hesitated before picking it up. Inside were faded photographs, hospital records, and an old handwritten confession. Her hands trembled as she read. 22 years earlier, her father had not betrayed the De Luca family. He had tried to stop the real traitor, Victor Romano. When Evelyn Carter discovered the truth, she saved young Alessandro before she was murdered to keep the secret buried. Emma slowly looked up. "My father." Tears filled her eyes. "Was innocent." Alessandro took the confession from her shaking hands. Every page confirmed the same horrifying truth. He had spent 25 years chasing revenge. Against the wrong family. He looked at Emma. Pain filled his usually emotionless face. "I stole your life," he whispered. "I punished you for a crime your family never committed." Emma stepped closer despite everything that had happened. "You didn't know. But I should have." For the first time in his life, Alessandro lowered his head. "I'm sorry." The feared mafia boss who had never apologized to anyone stood before his wife with genuine regret. Victor raised his pistol. Touching. Before he could fire, Emma shoved Alessandro aside. The gunshot echoed through the hall. A crystal chandelier shattered above them. Alessandro reacted instantly. One precise shot. Victor Romano collapsed to the marble floor. The war was finally over. Silence filled the mansion. Only the sound of rain remained. Weeks later, Sweet Haven Bakery reopened. The old wooden sign had been restored. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance. Inside, the smell of warm cinnamon and fresh bread once again welcomed every customer. But one thing had changed. Every morning before leaving for work, Alessandro De Luca stopped by the bakery. Not with bodyguards. Not with business. Just to drink coffee made by his wife. The people of New York still feared the ruthless mafia boss. They still whispered his name. But those who passed Sweet Haven each morning often smiled at the unusual sight through the window. The city's most dangerous man patiently waiting while his plus-size baker wife scolded him for stealing warm cinnamon rolls before they cooled. Revenge had brought them together. Truth had nearly torn them apart. But love had written the ending neither of them ever expected. The end.